All right, good afternoon. I ended this morning's talk by saying, on the one hand, and I begin this afternoon by saying, and on the other, I want to talk again about image of God. But what I did this morning was basically talking about the dangers that Israel faced and that we face as well. The reason that metaphor we use to talk about anthropology, the reason it was used was because monarchy was a very important reality in their history. And they recognized, as important and good as it was also dangerous. Or one could go over the line, and not that monarchy itself was dangerous, but as it was understood in the ancient Near Eastern world, it was dangerous. And more than dangerous. And to quote Lynn White again, they either had to give it up or think of a new way of interpreting it. And I don't know if you know this, but in the first book of Samuel, from chapters 8 to 10, those chapters all talk about the struggle that Israel had with monarchy. There were pro-monarchy people and there were anti-monarchy people. There were pro-monarchy people because, if I could quote Benjamin Franklin, if we don't hang together, we're going to all hang separately. Which means that we need some kind of cohesive bonding that holds us together. We cannot survive simply as individual Benjamin Franklin meant people. Ancient Israel meant tribes because they were picked off one after another. And so they needed some kind of unity, and at that time in history, that meant monarchy. So their existence, their continued existence, depended on some kind of a monarchy, which theologically was against their religion. Because their sense of monarchy was the king is either the son of the god or the god in human form. So what are they going to do? Well, we know what they did. They reinterpreted monarchy. And they insisted that the king had a special relationship with the god, that's true. But the king was an adopted son of God. Now, they didn't use that word, but in 2 Samuel 7, what we have is God speaking through the prophet Nathan, "You are my son, this day I have begotten you," which is a kind of making the king the son of God, again in a metaphor kind of way. It's important for us to understand that background, to understand the whole notion of image of God, meaning an image of God. And that's what I want to talk about today. Understand, as rich as that metaphor is, we can go off the deep end. Israel could go off the deep end on that. And we have gone off the deep end, we human beings. Not so much with the noun, but with the verbs, subdue and have dominion. And the consequence of that, the radicality with which we have taken on those verbs, is the exploitation of elements of the natural world to understand ourselves as center of the universe, kings and queens in the universe, and being able to do with what we want with everything that is around. We've gone off the deep end. We have, and consequently, all the toxicity and all the exploitation is the consequence of us going off the deep end with those verbs, which are very difficult words to interpret, extraordinarily difficult. The word subdue is sometimes used to speak about rape of women. All right? That's a hard word to soften. right? And have dominion. And the image of having dominion is of a king with his foot on the neck of his enemy. Now, I don't know how you can soften that language. It's very difficult. However, it must be softened. Otherwise, exploitation of the natural world is justified because that's what God said we should do. So in a certain sense, we have fallen into that. However, it is the image that we have. Is there nothing positive about being image of God? And of course, the entire idea of being an image of God. How did the images, in the ancient world function? I mean, they were just stuff. They could have been, the golden calf, they could have been made out of gold, probably not. Gold-plated, maybe. Carved, maybe. All you got to do is look in any kind of a book, you see images. Images that represent how ancient or traditional people referenced what their understanding of divinity was. But how did they function? Did people really think that the image was going to get up, put on armor, and go out and fight? I doubt that. But what does image mean? Image means that where this thing, and let's call it an icon, not an idol, an icon, simply because I want to use the image for image of God. That this icon, this symbol of the power of God, or of the fertility of God. There were fertility goddesses with big round hips, and everybody knew what that meant. Right? So there were images of fertility goddesses, images of God. How did they function? Something within the image itself would remind the people of how it functioned, what it was expected to do. Seldom was there an image, or I should say an icon, seldom was there one where the God did everything. The closest that we can find is the sun, which was the supreme God. But I don't know traditional people that thought that the deity, the sun deity, was responsible for reproduction. The moon deity, probably, because of the woman's cycle of moon. And so that's why usually the moon deity was feminine, because of the menstrual cycles, which follow the movements of the moon. So they did certain things, but not everything. All right? And this particular image is told, we are told, subdue and have dominion. And exactly what a king would do. But this is not a king. In order to really understand what Genesis 1 creation narrative says about image of God, you got to understand what Genesis 3 says about wanting to be God. All right? In other words, it's not what you do, it's how you do it. Do you do it as an image of God, or do you do it as a divine being, as a God itself? That's the issue. How do you do it? And how does an image of God subdue and have dominion? Put that aside for just a moment. Think of an ambassador of any country. Think of an ambassador to the United States. Now all of the news is about Afghanistan. And I saw the former ambassador, U.S. ambassador of Afghanistan, interviewed on the news. How does an ambassador function? What do they do? For whom do they stand? They do not stand for themselves. Whose will do they follow? They are the ambassador appointed by the president. They represent the way the president interprets the nation. They are not there on their own accord. They are there at the pleasure of the one who sent them there, which means that you represent me. That's what every president presumes to have said to ambassadors. You represent me. I represent the nation. You represent me. And when they don't represent the president, then they get a new ambassador. That's how an image of God functions, because it is an image of God. I think a good contemporary metaphor would be a national flag. All it is a piece of cloth, but it represents the jurisdiction of the nation. That's very important. It represents the jurisdiction of the nation. Where you see a national flag flying, unless it's Irish. Irish people fly their flags regardless of what country they're in. All right? But only on their property. Somebody told me that once. An Irish person told me that once. That's not an Irish slam. But where you see a flag, a national flag flying, that nation has some kind of jurisdiction wherever it flies. The flag is simply a piece of cloth. The nation decides what's on the flags. Some flags are really artistic. Our flag is historical. The history of the United States is on our flag. Some things it's not terribly artistic. Like the Japanese flag is very artistic, but it also says something about how the Japanese understand Japan, the land of the rising sun. They're surrounded by water, so you see the rising sun, and they interpret what that means. That's how they interpret. The flag is a representation of something about that nation. The flag itself, I don't want to say it's not worth much, but it's not. It's worth, how much that cloth is worth in terms of real money. However, you may not disrespect the national flag. It is a crime to disrespect a national flag. And not simply in the United States. Why? Because of what it represents. Now that means, in that story of Genesis 1, to be made in the image and according to the likeness, but to be made in the image of God means we stand for God in the rest of the natural world. Think of that. Today we use the word witness. We stand before God. We represent God to the rest of the natural world. What an extraordinary privilege. What is better than that? We do what we're supposed to do. But let me say it positively. We do in the natural world what God would do in the natural world. Now, I know some of our theology says that God works through us, but still, God works through us to represent God. We say this all the time. We believe that our God is compassionate. And if our faith is really more than just an intellectual assent, if it is really active, that means that if we believe that our God is compassionate and we are image of God, then we will be compassionate. And people will know that our God is compassionate because we are. If we believe that our God is willing to be reconciled with people who have offended God, then our presence in society would say we are willing to be reconciled with people who have offended us, or people we think have offended us, or have offended God. Whatever the case, we're willing to be reconciled with people without waiting until they agree with us. So in a very real sense, to understand us as image of God means we are the manifestation of the activity and the dynamics and whatever you want to call the reality of God in the world. And it is a privilege, but it is a privilege that we can misunderstand and, go to the extreme. And then, again, think of the temptation, the ultimate temptation, at the heart of all temptation. No one is going to tell me what to do. Which is, I am the center of the universe, I'm the one who is important, I'm the one that's got the power, and you better recognize that, everybody else. Now, I'm saying, look at somebody who says that. Well, I could name a couple people, as we all could. Maybe not in those words. I'm boss here. I'm boss here. But the point is that our actions say that. Our actions say that. But look at the great privilege that is ours. And I want to say that is our privilege as creatures. As creatures. The story does not say, and before they were made in the image of God, or immediately after they were made in the image of God, they were baptized. It doesn't say that. Nor do I want to minimize the importance of baptism. Please. But let's look at what it means to be a creature of God, made in the image of God, as we find here in this particular story. The great privilege that is ours. What about God do you manifest? Think about that. What about God do you manifest? Gentleness, strength, honesty, care for others, generosity. If these are characteristics of your personality, where did you get it? Where did it come from? I mean, it is part of what it means to be a creature. It's innate to all of us. Some of us have it in great abundance. Others must work very hard to get it. Some people by nature are sympathetic. Others have to work much harder than, at being sympathetic. And I think, and think about the talents that you have. I think that the more refined certain of our talents are, the harder it is sometimes for us to be humble about what we can do well. Which means there's always room for improvement. But we know that all goodness comes from God. Our tradition tells us this. I don't know about you, but I have always thought, where did ancient Israel ever get those insights? In the ancient Near Eastern world, they would not have won a prize. They were a nobody nation compared to the Egyptians. Look at the culture of the Egyptians, or the culture of the Mesopotamians. Today that would be Iraq or Syria. Magnificent culture. I mean, you never hear about the hanging gardens of Tel Aviv. What did Israel have? Oh, they had the Temple of Solomon. But that in no way did Solomon's temple compare with what the other ancient societies had. And Israel was almost always under somebody's thumb. I mean, you read the stories the stories of magnificent successes, but who's the hero in Israel's successes? Unlike most societies, the heroes are not members of the society. The heroes in Israel's hero stories are always God, always. And now God working through humans, but it's always God. And Israel is constantly telling stories about its own failures. Who does that? Where did they come to that insight? Now, I don't know the answer to that from study. I think the answer is an answer of faith. That to me is some kind of revelation, because there's no way you could have reasoned it out given its history. Israel was independent during the lifetime of David, and the only reason was because other little nations around David were having their own internal problems. And when you read stories about David entering into treaties with the neighboring nations, he always comes out better than they do, which means he was stronger. You read stories about Solomon entering into treaty. David gets money and land. Solomon loses money and land and gets wives. And wives, not for sex, wives to protect him from the neighboring nations, because he married women of the neighboring kingdoms. And no father is going to call together an army and attack the nation where his daughter and her retinue are from. So these women, all of this, no man has that much time. All of the wives that Solomon had is a way protected by these women. This is not a picture of a strong man. So much so that at his death, the nation broke apart. We had enough from your father. We don't want it from you, they said to the son of Solomon. And Israel tells these stories. And then after that, they were always under threat from Mesopotamia, either Egypt or Mesopotamia, except at the time of the Maccabees, which was about 167 before the Common Era, when there was a revolt. That's not a long time. 163, I should say 167 to 163. That's not a long time, where they revolted against the Greek insistence that they worship the Greek gods. But then Romans came and conquered the then ancient Near Eastern world, and they were under the Romans. Jesus was not a free man. He lived under Roman occupation. Israel was not terribly respectable in a certain sense. And yet, Ogden Nash has a wonderful phrase that captures what the Jews think about their choice, their having been chosen by God. How odd of God to choose the Jews. Of all people. Why not choose the Egyptians? Imagine the wealth and the artifacts. If the Egyptians had been chosen. But that's what not happened. It's not what happened at all. And this is their story. We represent God to the world. Is that not what we find in the story of Abraham in the beginning of Genesis 12? I will bless you. I will make you great. I will make you a source of blessing for the rest of the world. We find that in Genesis 12. That's how they understood themselves. That they will pronounce and give witness to the rest of the world the goodness of their God. That's what it means to be image of God. And so it's because of human limitation and human weakness that we sometimes put that in jeopardy. We sometimes forget that we are an image of God, not an icon or an idol. I should have said idol, not icon. We're not an idol. We are not divine. That is the special kind of favor we receive, not from our own personal nature. It is a special gift from God. So we look then, and I invite you to think about, what is it that you manifest to the rest of the world, to the people with whom you live, to those who know you, with whom you interact? What about God shines out from you? As I have to do that myself as well. What about God shines out from us, Sisters of St. Agnes? What does Fond du Lac, Wisconsin think of the Sisters of St. Agnes? What kind of images of God have we shown them? We're good teachers. We're sensitive and efficient nurses. But what about the qualities of God? And you and I know that there are, both within us and within the congregation. And to that extent, we are images of God. Rightfully so, doing what we're supposed to be doing. Manifesting the goodness of God in the goodness that we show to others. The understanding and compassion that we show to others. The patience that we show to people. I've heard that story 5 times now. At the same meal. Takes patience. Because who wants to tell the same story 5 times on purpose? And so we know we must be patient with each other and help each other. And not simply, because there's nothing else we can do about it, but because we are image of God. Now that's good anthropology, to understand image of God in that way. That's good anthropology. And I hope that it opens up, what I tried to talk about. I hope it opens up not only what image of God is, but also what it means in a certain sense to be present in the world as representatives. Paul uses the word ambassador, or at least in the translation. He uses the word ambassador when he talks about we are ambassadors of reconciliation in the world. Now, had Paul called on the image or the metaphor in Genesis 1, he would have said, if he was in my class, that we are images of God manifesting reconciliation. He says that in Romans, I believe. So the notion, the theological notion, is found throughout other places in the scripture. So I like that understanding of the metaphor. I must admit, better, first of all, that is an understanding of the metaphor. It is a valid understanding of the metaphor. It's not the only understanding of the metaphor. All right? So as I said this morning, I think it benefits nothing to find fault with theology you don't particularly like, unless it's not good theology. Okay? But even good theology, as I have said, is inadequate. But metaphors are wide open for interpretation so long as you are faithful to what the text says. I don't think I have said anything. I've gone off, but I haven't said anything that cannot be traced back to something either within the text or within the understanding of Israel at this time in history. Now, with that kind of anthropology, then, let's open it up to the relationship between anthropology and cosmology. Let's be specific about that, or perhaps a better phrase to use is integrity of creation. Because now we're going back to the 2 verbs that I wanted to put aside. You can't avoid those verbs. All right? Subdue and have dominion. Both of them say exercise power. But how are we to do it? And the answer is the way God would do it, because we represent God. Which means then we must look to see how does God exercise dominion in the natural world? Through the powers and the forces of nature that work together And so then if we're going to talk about, again, getting back to what the Pope talks about, when he says our use of the natural world. I've said this before, I say it again. We cannot exist if we do not use elements of the natural world. We are totally dependent on it, on elements of the natural world. So to say that I will no longer fill in the blank, I will no longer eat because I'm destroying food. I will no longer, it's ridiculous to think that. No longer breathe. The issue is not that we use it. The issue is that we abuse it. We don't use it the way God would have us use it. Sustainable. That's a big word in our vocabulary nowadays. I doubt whether, 10, 20 years ago, we would be talking about sustainable farming. Maybe farmers would have, but people in the city who know nothing about farming probably wouldn't. The vocabulary tells us we've turned a corner. Sustainable. Recycle. Recycle. Did you ever recycle before? What we did, we cashed in. I guess we did recycle. We cashed in green stamps. We cashed in milk bottles. I don't know if they were recycled. I'm not sure. But recycling, that's tattooed on our memories. Reuse. Many of us grew up in families where you wore hand-me-downs. I taught with somebody once who never wore a hand-me-down, though she was not the oldest in the family. They just didn't do that. They gave the hand-me-downs to the neighbors. She lived in Shakers Heights in a Cleveland suburb of great money. And I'm the daughter of a truck mechanic, nowadays referred to as an automotive engineer. And I had an older sister. And my parents were not about to throw away clothing. So we recycled clothing. I remember, as many of you I'm sure remember as well, during the Second World War, or around that time toward the end of the Second World War, were tin cans. You took the top off, you took the bottom off, and you pushed the tin can down with the tops in, and you had to save tin cans. And there was recycling. I don't know if we sold it. We probably did. I didn't get the money, so I can't remember if we sold it or not. But I remember how much fun it was for me to step on the tin cans and crush them so that we were saving, we were recycling. But now we must recycle. And not because if we don't, we will not survive on this planet. That's anthropocentric. We must recycle because we owe it to the integrity of creation to preserve life, because we are not in charge of it. We may be the image of God, the caretaker, the steward, but it's not ours. I used to think of the gifts of the natural world as gifts until somebody pointed out to me, when you give a gift to someone, you are also telling them, use it the way you want, not necessarily the way I want you to use it. Consequently, if the natural world is a gift from God, God is saying, use it the way you want, not the way I would want you to use it, my friend is telling me. Rather say that we have elements of the natural world in trust. And the giver never gives up ownership when it is in trust. All we do is manage it. I must admit to you, I like that understanding better than a gift that then the one receiving the gift can use as they choose. Maybe that's just quibbling with language, but I think it's important that we see the difference. The difference is what's important, not necessarily the word that we use. So in those words then, subdue and have dominion means exercise management. Now, from an Israelite point of view, historically, the king had to subdue enemies and had to have dominion over the kingdom, elements within the kingdom. And if we see ourselves as image of God, with the responsibility to subdue enemies for God's sake, then the question is, and who are God's enemies? And that leads us into another field of theology. Okay? But the whole question of subdue and have dominion, the way the meaning can be softened of those words is that we realize it is not exclusively our decision, because what it is we are managing does not belong to us. It belongs to God. Creation narratives do not say that God created the world and gave it to human beings. Psalm 24 begins, "The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof." It is God's world. We manage it. We are stewards. Whatever word, always realizing there is privilege, but there's also responsibility. We are accountable to our stewardship, or we are accountable to God for our imageship. So the accountability, if you want to use that metaphor about getting accountable to your life, it's not simply have you obeyed the commandments. And how have you used elements of the natural world to which I gave you stewardship? So again, when we read material like the Holy Father's encyclical, and he does mention image in there. And anybody who makes comments about this, invariably the Genesis 1 creation story is going to come up. Either saying, we were given the right to subdue and have dominion. Go back to what Mr. T said, it's my land, I can do with it what I want. Well, yes and no. So it's either that or we are faithful stewards. Faithful stewards. There's a parable, I can't remember which one, at the end of the parable. It's one of the, I can't remember which one because there are so many that are similar. It's that story where a landowner or a wealthy man distributes his property and his wealth to his servants and then goes off. And when he comes back, they must give an account of their stewardship. That's what image of God, that kind of thing is. And those who are very faithful, the one who does nothing, buries it, who does not use it appropriately, who does not manage it, allows it to just stay, is the one that gets kicked out. So this notion, that we are accountable for God, not simply for the fidelity to a law, as important as that law is. We understand law not like the Italian way of understanding law, not the Roman understanding. The Italian or the Roman understanding, and I do not mean this as, in any kind of facetious way, is we'll try to do it. That's not the American way. That's not the Western way of understanding law. Law is you're going to do it. It's not I'll do my best. I'll try to do it. There are different ways of understanding law in legal practice. But if you look at the Ten Commandments, the word can also mean directives. The word law is very heavy for us. They are also called the 10 words in Jewish tradition. 10 words or 10 directives, but not just 10 laws. That also brings with it a very heavy interpretation. So I'm saying that not because I don't think it's important to be faithful to that structure, to those laws, to those directives. But there is something that is beyond law. It is something that is deeper than law. It is the sense of responsibility to be faithful to that to which, or that has been entrusted to us. It has been entrusted to us. That's what the image of God in Genesis 1 means. It has been entrusted to us. And how faithful have we been in caring for that has been entrusted to us? I want to leave us with some moments to do serious reflection on what a great privilege this theology tells us is ours. A great privilege. We manifest God in a way no other creation does. Not that we're better than them. From a scientific point of view, we are more complicated in the development of our psychic powers. It's more intricate. That's what science tells us. Our faith tells us that we have been chosen to manifest God in a unique way, as one meaning the whole race, as one who cares for, as faithful stewards. But this is such a great privilege that we manifest because, again, I want to say, we are the natural world reflecting. We bring all of the beauty of the natural world because we are the natural world. We bring all of that beauty, all of the psychic powers, all of the forces of nature. We bring that by free will to give glory to God. We have free will. That's what makes us so unique. High psychic powers to exercise free will. We do it not because we've been programmed, but because we have decided to. That's how much God has trusted